Hi, my name is Daniel Tejada, and this is my video demonstration of my scaffold lesson plan. The lesson comes in the way of a lecture using PowerPoint. I would start the lesson off with a real brief discussion with the class to try to spark a little bit of prior knowledge. Now, class, as most of you know, today we're going to be starting a lesson on World War II and how the United States got into World War II. Now, most of you have had a little bit of lesson on it from previous classes, but before we get started into our lecture, I'd like to start off with a quick write. If you notice the board here, there is a couple of prompts here. You have a choice. You can either do prompt 1, which is what do you think was the reason that the U.S. entered World War II? Or, if you're not too sure there, tell me what you know about World War II. Now, you could think about anything that might spark your memory. Most of you have seen a lot of movies. There's been a lot of movies written about World War II. Movies like Saving Private Ryan, Pearl Harbor, and these are movies that have just come out in recent years. Some of you might have seen them. So if you're not too sure why we were first forced into the war, then you can write a little bit about what you know about the war. Okay, class, good. We're done with our quick write. Good. We're going to move on to our lecture now. Let's turn our attention to the PowerPoint. Now, Pearl Harbor, the event that changed the world. Now, when we say change the world, prior to the Pearl Harbor attacks, and we're going to get into that in a minute, the world was a very different place. The United States wasn't involved in World War II. There was fighting going on in Europe and in the Pacific with Japan. And the United States tried to stay out of it. They tried to stay as neutral as much as they could. It wasn't until December 7th, 1941. At 7 a.m., I have a picture here of a gentleman standing there. That was your servicemen, what they looked like. But on December 7th, at around 7 a.m., there was 6 Japanese carriers out in the Pacific, and without the United States knowing, they were heading towards our base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Now, what an aircraft carrier is, if you're not too sure, imagine yourself just a gigantic ship, a huge ship, and a lot of you have seen these on television before. These ships are carrying hundreds of planes. So the planes sit on top of the carrier, and they're working their way towards it. The reason they used carriers is because they couldn't fly planes all the way from Japan to Hawaii, so they had to use these carriers because they just didn't have enough fuel to get there. Now, the surprise attack came at 7:55 a.m. That was called the first wave of attacks. And there was primary targets. Japan already knew through intelligence or by spending some time researching what they wanted to do. So they had some primary targets, the USS Arizona, the USS Oklahoma, the USS West Virginia, and the USS Nevada. Now, some of you have been to Hawaii. Has anybody out there been to Hawaii before? Who here has ever been to Pearl Harbor and have seen kind of the memorial? Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to see. There you'll see how all the ships were set up. They have nice models of how everything was. There was a second wave of targets as well. About a half hour after the first wave, a second wave of attacks came in from the Japanese fighters, and they included trying to hit air bases, other military facilities like the hospital, and basically any other ship left in Pearl Harbor. Here, we have a quick little map that gives you an idea of how the waves came in. The first wave, if you notice up here, they kind of swooped in from the bottom and they attacked Pearl Harbor from here. Okay, the second wave worked its way this way, but the second wave worked its way inland because they were trying to hit other facilities. Even though the ships were here, at some of these other spots, they had aircrafts on the flight lines just kind of hanging out. And again, nobody realized what was going on. This is just another map of how the ships were set up. It kind of give you a good idea of how things were. And again, you have to kind of imagine, nobody had any idea. Most of these ships had servicemen and sailors asleep inside. It was a Sunday, a day off. People weren't planning on working at all that day. It's kind of like a day off for the military, and they were sleeping either in the ships or in some of the military facilities close by. Now, there was a lot of damage. Ships were either sunk or completely destroyed. Okay, when we say sunk, they were hit, and slowly but surely they worked their way down, and some were completely destroyed, just exploded on impact. What I'd like us to do now is we're going to get in ourselves in groups, okay? And we're going to, in the pre-assigned groups that we already have, I want you guys to get together, and I want you to make a list of why you think Japan might have wanted to attack the U.S.? What do you think were their reasons? And if you're not sure, just think about, why today, when we think about some of the wars going on, why do enemies attack each other? And try to think of what do you think were some of the reasons that Japan would have wanted to attack the U.S. Okay, let's get back to our seats. We're going to continue talking about that. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the damage that was done. Now, 4 battleships were sunk. 4 were disabled. 13 other ships were damaged. 188 planes were destroyed. And this was the human casualties. Okay, we had over 1,000. We had 1,178 military and civilian people hurt. We had 2,335 military people killed, and we had 68 people killed. Now, one thing you have to remember too, when we think about the damage that happened, it doesn't sound like, well, 4 ships, 8 ships, 10 ships. It doesn't seem like a lot. But at the time, Pearl Harbor had most of the U.S. fighter ships were at Pearl Harbor. We didn't have as many. It was during World War II that we built hundreds and hundreds of ships. And prior to that, that was pretty much it for the U.S. Now, at the end of the attacks, the following day, President Roosevelt announced to the world that this was a day in infamy. He was addressing the world, saying that the United States will be entering the war, and this is a day that will never be forgotten. Okay, let's get back to our groups. And what I'd like us to work on now is, after watching this video, so we're going to watch this video, after watching this video, I'd like us to just write a real quick reflection on what do you think the President's speech was about, and what do you think this attack did to the United States? How do you think the United States responded?